folks, this video corresponds to your notes for interest groups. So as you are completing these notes from Edpuzzle or listening to these, you should be filling in the blanks and answering the questions on your note sheet that you can find in Google Classroom. And when you are finished, make sure to submit those in Google Classroom for credit as well. So as you can see from the title of this slideshow, we are going to be talking about interest groups today. So we've spent this whole unit so far talking about political participation, and now we're going to take a look at interest groups, what they are, and how they influence public policy, elections, and political participation. Okay, so the first thing that we need to talk about is interest groups 101, the basics, right? What is an interest group? And an interest group here, you'll see the definition on your screen. An interest group is an organization of people with common policy goals who enter into the political process to achieve those goals. So they have a specific focus, right? And they have a set understanding of what they want done in the government, okay? Now, oftentimes, as you'll see later this week, interest groups can be ideologically based, right? Some of these interest groups support policies that are more conservative. Some of these interest groups support policies that are more liberal. Okay, so it just depends on the interest group and what they focus on. So one of the biggest examples that we'll look at this week is the NRA. Okay, that's a big example. So they're an organization of people, and their common policy goal is to advocate for gun rights, gun ownership, protection of the Second Amendment, right? And their job is to push and influence the political process to achieve that goal, okay? Now, on a surface, this kind of sounds a little bit like a political party, but there are two main differences between a political party and an interest group. And the first is that interest groups do not elect a candidate to office. They will instead support candidates that have similar views to them. Okay, so a political party, if you remember from last week and the week before, when you were nominating your own candidate and doing those notes on political parties, their goal is to get someone into office so that they can try and influence the government's decision making, right? You want someone with your ideology in the government to influence that. Interest groups don't do that. They don't elect candidates. They don't have someone running for them. Like, there is no candidate of the NRA. Okay, there are, I should say, candidates instead who are probably more conservative, probably more of the Republican Party, that support the NRA, and the interest group, the NRA, would support that candidate because they have a similar view, for example. Okay. Another difference is that interest groups are much more focused in scope in terms of what they do and what they advocate for and believe and what they know about. Interest groups are typically experts on 1 to 2 issues, and that is it. Okay, right? The NRA, gun rights, Second Amendment, that's it. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, deals with civil rights, that's it. Okay. That is in contrast to a political party, right? Republicans and Democrats, as you guys saw in that research activity and as you were making your own party, have a broad array of platform issues, right? There's a little bit of everything in a political party's platform, ranging from immigration to the economy to foreign affairs. Interest groups are the experts, okay? So think of it like this, guys. When you're sick or you need a checkup, right? Let's say you've got maybe a common cold or you need to go get like a vaccine. You're going to go to a practitioner. Maybe it's your pediatrician, or when you get older, you'll go to your primary care physician. Okay. Those are like your general doctors, right? They have a broad focus on ailments and illnesses. Okay. But let's say that you have an allergy. Okay. Or let's say that you injure your shoulder and need surgery, okay? You would go to then a specialist, right? Your primary care physician or your pediatrician would refer you to someone who is more specialized in that particular area, Okay. Interest groups are like those specialized doctors. Okay. So they're the ones that are focusing on their particular piece of the policy issue. Okay. So there are four main things that interest groups do. And the first is this practice of lobbying. Okay. But lobbying is the practice of persuading congressmen to support your ideas and vote in a particular way. Okay, so that can be done in a multitude of ways. A lot of times, lobbyists will take out Congress people to dinner. They'll provide members of Congress with information on legislation or for legislation, right? As I just said, interest groups specialize. Congress itself is not an expert on all subjects, right? I have a hard time finding or figuring that a congressperson could themselves write a healthcare law from scratch by themselves. That's going to be the job of an expert, right? So a congressperson might lobby, an interest group dealing with healthcare might lobby a member of Congress and provide them with information to then write the legislation the way that they want to. Right? You're going to persuade this congressperson to get your ideas and to vote in a particular way that supports your interest group. Okay. So, for example, in that healthcare bill, right, Congress would probably consult an interest group, and there would be a couple. They would consult insurance companies, healthcare associations, doctors associations, etc. And each of those interest groups would be pushing for something else, some other or some part of a bill to then be implemented into policy. Okay. And the idea is that when candidates then get into office, or if they're already in office, they will vote by way of the interest group. Okay. And as you can probably already tell, interest groups as a result, have a lot of influence. And that can be negative. When we see that a big critique of interest groups comes into play where it might not be the people that they represent that the congressmen and women listen to. Instead, it might be the interest group. So this influence of lobbying can be negative. Okay. Another way of lobbying or persuading that interest groups partake in is something called electioneering. Okay. Electioneering is when interest groups aid candidates financially and support their election. Okay. And the idea behind this is kind of like if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. If you support my interest, I will in turn give you campaign contributions. And as we've seen, guys, the more money you have in an election, the more likely it is that you will win. Okay, so money plays a very important role in the election process. So this does have some weight. Now, interest groups, I should say, do this electioneering through political action committees. And you'll hear them called PACs or super PACs. And these are committees, organizations designed to collect money and provide financial support to candidates. Okay? And as I said, this can be, again, pretty criticized because this can lead to congressmen listening to interest groups over their constituents, their people that they represent, instead following the will of the interest group that has money versus following the will of the people, which is what our democracy is supposed to be about. So as you can see, interest groups have a positive, right? They're providing Congress with information to make appropriate legislation, but it can get kind of shady when it comes to these almost favors that kind of come as a result. Okay. And I think this is a pretty good, I know it's a little blurry, but I think this is a pretty good image to reflect how Congress is affected by interest groups. So this is the late Senator John McCain, who has since passed away. But as you can see, connected to him are strings, and pulling those strings are lobbyists. Okay, so kind of inferring that lobbyists are the ones that are creating puppets out of these Congress people and directing them to do what they want because they have the opportunity to provide the money, right? And then the lobbyist is saying, for appearance's sake, he's cutting a few ties, right? He's saying that he's going to cut ties with lobbyists, but in reality, he's the one being controlled by the lobbyists, okay? Other things that interest groups do, if they can't influence policy and legislation, interest groups can go to the courts. And this is done through litigation, which is basically a fancy way of saying that they'll sue, okay? So interest groups can challenge legislation in court. They can sue or challenge a group or policy in court to influence policy in the future. Okay. So one of the biggest examples, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Okay, as you can probably tell from their name, they're responsible for protecting civil liberties to make sure that your rights of everybody in accordance with the Bill of Rights are protected. So in the early 2000s, Ohio actually had a law or a bill go into law that outlawed gay marriage. Okay. The ACLU then challenged that policy in court, saying that that law violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, saying that it was against the Constitution. Okay. That actually went to the Supreme Court, and it was viewed as, yes, that policy, that law violated the rights of individuals. Okay. So as you can see, while they didn't exactly have a say initially in that law becoming a thing, right? That law was passed by the people of Ohio. They were able to reverse the policy by challenging it in court. So oftentimes they will do this if their lobbying efforts are unsuccessful. Okay. Another and final thing that interest groups do is influence public opinion. They can bring awareness to an issue. They can mobilize public opinion, make people get out and do certain things. So if this building here looks familiar to you guys, this was actually done by Greenpeace, which is like an animal rights environmentalist group. This is actually Procter & Gamble. Downtown, which as I'm sitting in my apartment, I'm seeing exactly where this was right now. But they protested a couple years ago the cosmetic line, like that part of P&G that makes Head & Shoulders, and using palm oil, which destroys rainforests and the habitat of tigers. So they actually unveiled these banners and hung them on the P&G towers to kind of bring awareness to their issue, right? Stop putting tiger survival on the line. And then there's like a destruction picture here, wipes out dandruff and rainforests, right? Because that's the kind of the slogan, the trademark of Head & Shoulders. Yeah, it might wipe out your dandruff, but it's also harming the environment. Okay. Another example would be Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or sometimes you'll hear it say Mothers Against Destructive Decisions. One of the ways that they can mobilize public opinion and bring awareness to an issue would be to encourage people to take the pledge to not text and drive, to not drink and drive, right? You'll see commercials or billboards that say, take the pledge now, text, stop drunk driving to some certain number, right? That is a way that interest groups can get their message out there to the public and encourage people to take action, okay? So why so powerful, right? Why is it that interest groups have such a sway in public opinion and in our government? The reality is that not all of them do. Okay, there are over 25,000 interest groups in the United States, but not all of them are equal. Okay, some of them are more influential than others. Some of them you probably have never heard of and you never will. Others are like the NRA, for example. So membership is one characteristic that makes an interest group powerful. I bring up the NRA because you guys will be looking at that next this week, kind of looking at how they have shaped gun rights legislation. over time. So the NRA, for example, has over 4 million registered members, okay? And I just want you to think about that when it comes to voting, right? Let's say that there is a bill on a ballot that is going to restrict gun ownership. The NRA has a huge voting base that would get out and vote no on that potential bill, right? So it does have voting implications in terms of getting policy accomplished. Money, right? Money is also what makes an interest group more powerful. If you have more money, you have more influence, right? Because you can provide more election campaign dollars, right? You can electioneer more. The more you electioneer, the more you might be able to persuade and lobby Congress people to vote for your interest when they get into office. Okay, so it's kind of like this cycle. You might hear it called a quid pro quo, okay? So for example here, Goldman Sachs, which is an investment group, actually donated $8 million in 2012, right? So they obviously had a pretty big sway in that election. And the focus of interest groups make them powerful. There's actually power and strength in being an expert, right? Congress is actually reliant on a lot of these interest groups for their expertise. As I said, Congress is like those general practitioner doctors who have a broad knowledge of everything. Right? They're not an expert in the environment, in healthcare, in the economy. So they are in some ways reliant on these interest groups for policy. Policy probably would not be made as effective as it is without these interest groups. So if you have a lot of members, if you have a lot of money, Congress is probably going to listen to you when it comes to writing those bills that may in the future become laws. Okay? So at this point, make sure to go back and fill in any blanks if you have them left empty. And then I want to end reminding you guys to answer the final analysis question. So on the second page of your notes, you will see this political cartoon, okay, that is up on my screen. So my question for you guys is, based on the information from today's notes, what message is this cartoon trying to send about interest groups and our government? Okay, so you can say, you know, it's positive because, it's negative because. What is the argument of the cartoon? So right here, we've got a congressperson. You can see Congress on the podium. And in the speech bubble, it says, nobody tells me what to do or say. And the pencil is labeled lobbyists. Okay, so based on what we've talked about today in these notes, what message is this cartoon trying to send about interest groups and our government? What is the argument? So make sure to answer this question if you would like to receive full credit on your notes. And if you guys have any questions, make sure to fill in the question at the end of the Edpuzzle. I look forward to reading those, seeing how I can help in any way, and make sure to turn in that note sheet to Google Classroom when you are finished. So I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.